There comes a moment in every life when the past stops feeling like a memory and starts feeling like a shape. A quiet outline around the person someone believes they're allowed to be. Most people never notice when it happens. They only sense the weight, soft, familiar, and strangely loyal. It stays with them, not as a story, but as a definition. Because pain doesn't arrive as a single event. It arrives as a lens, a way of seeing the world, and eventually, a way of seeing the self. But there is a truth hidden beneath that quiet heaviness, that a person is not simply the product of what broke them, shaped them, or silenced them. They are also the space that remains, the part of the self that still wonders, still reaches, still chooses. And that space is where becoming begins. You rarely recognize the moment when the past first begins to reveal itself. It doesn't announce its arrival with clarity or drama. Instead, it slips quietly into your awareness, showing up in small reactions that catch you off guard. A comment that feels heavier than it should. A silence that suddenly feels too loud. A moment where you notice you're holding your breath without knowing why. At first, you blame the situation, the mood, the other person. But there's a part of you that senses something deeper, something older, something that doesn't quite belong to the present moment. This is the subtle whisper of the past, the faint pressure of an emotional weight that has been resting on your inner world longer than you realized. It shows itself through patterns, being overly careful, overly pleasing, overly distant. It speaks through reactions that feel too big for the moment, or through numbness that feels too familiar to be natural. You begin to notice that these responses don't match your current life. They echo from an older story, one you haven't revisited in years. The recognition isn't loud. It's tender, almost fragile. It feels like exhaustion mixed with clarity, like finally seeing the outline of something you've been carrying without noticing the shape. You start realizing that some parts of you were built out of protection, not preference. That certain behaviors were formed not because they reflect who you are, but because at some point they helped you survive. Most people spend years outrunning this awareness. They stay busy, productive, constantly in motion, not realizing that their pace is less about ambition and more about avoiding what lingers behind them. Yet eventually, life slows them down. Not aggressively, but gently. Through a quiet drive home, a conversation that hits a soft place, a night when sleep refuses to arrive. And in those small openings, the weight becomes undeniable. You feel the accumulated heaviness of unspoken emotions, forgotten memories, and patterns learned long before you were old enough to question them. This is the true beginning, not of healing, but of noticing. The realization that the weight you feel is not a flaw, not a failure, but a signal. A message from the parts of you that have waited patiently beneath the surface, hoping to be acknowledged. You begin to see that this heaviness is not your identity, but a story your identity has been carrying. A story built from echoes rather than choices, and in that recognition, something shifts. Not dramatically, but quietly. You understand that the past shaped you, but it is not the whole of you. It is only the beginning of the path you are now finally able to see. And seeing it is where becoming truly begins. Every pattern has an origin, though people rarely remember the exact moment it formed. The beginning is usually quiet, hidden inside early experiences that felt ordinary at the time. A child learns the world through tone, through moments of safety or tension, through the unspoken emotional climate of the home. And long before a child has language, they have impressions, shadows of meaning absorbed through the body, not the mind. They learn what earns warmth and what invites silence. They notice which of their feelings are welcomed and which are inconvenient. They learn the subtle art of shaping themselves to match their environment, not out of manipulation, but out of instinct. In those early years, the nervous system is wide open, absorbing everything as truth. If a child grows up around unpredictability, they learn to stay alert, always scanning, always anticipating. If they grow up around emotional distance, they learn to silence themselves, shrinking parts of their inner world to match the available space. If they grow up around love that feels conditional, they learn to measure their worth by how much they can give, how little they can need. The origins of identity often begin with these tiny adjustments, small accommodations made in silence. A child does not think, "I must protect myself." They simply feel, "This is how I survive." And so the shaping begins. The child who learns to disappear becomes the adult who struggles to speak. The child who learns to be strong becomes the adult who has forgotten how to feel. The child who learns to please becomes the adult who mistakes exhaustion for love. These patterns are not choices. They are inheritances. Not inherited from genetics alone, but from atmosphere, from emotional history, from the unresolved wounds of the people who came before. A parent who fears conflict raises a child who fears anger. A parent who is overwhelmed raises a child who becomes afraid of being a burden. A parent who never learned tenderness raises a child who learns to live without it. None of this is intentional. Most caregivers do the best they can with the emotional tools they have, yet the child still absorbs everything as instruction. And the instructions remain long after childhood ends. This is why adults find themselves reacting in ways that confuse them. They are not responding to the moment in front of them. They are responding to the echoes of the original environment. Even when life changes, the internal world does not update automatically. The nervous system keeps old codes running. Old warnings active, old protections intact. Someone might grow up, move out, build new relationships, and create an entirely different life, yet still carry the emotional blueprints of their earliest years. They may not remember the details, but their body does. The tightening in the chest, the drop in the stomach, the urge to stay quiet, the instinct to withdraw or over-explain. These are not random behaviors. They are memories encoded as reactions. Childhood is not just a time period. It is the foundation of the emotional world. And even when the mind forgets, the body remembers the rules it learned. But understanding the origin is not about blaming the past. It is about seeing the architecture of the self with clarity. Because when a person realizes where their patterns began, they also begin to see that those patterns were formed for a context that no longer exists. They were necessary once, but they are not destiny. This chapter is the uncovering of that truth, that what shaped you was real, but it was never meant to define you forever. It was simply the starting point of a story that is still unfolding. There comes a point in every life when experiences stop being external events and start becoming internal truths. This shift doesn't happen suddenly. It happens slowly, almost silently, through repetition. The human brain is designed to learn from patterns, to protect with precision, to turn whatever feels familiar into a framework for survival. And so, the mind begins collecting impressions, some small, some overwhelming, and stores them not as memories, but as meanings. When a person is ignored, their brain learns, my feelings are not important. When they are punished for expressing themselves, it learns, my truth is dangerous. When they receive love inconsistently, it learns, I must earn connection. These lessons sink deep, far beyond conscious awareness, settling into the nervous system like scripts that play automatically. Internalization is not a flaw. It is a function. The brain prefers familiarity over uncertainty, even if the familiar is painful. Neural pathways solidify around what has been repeated, not around what is healthy. The mind remembers the past not as a story, but as a template. This is why someone can grow up and still feel pulled toward patterns they consciously wish to escape. Why they might find themselves attracted to people who trigger old wounds, or drawn to environments that replicate childhood dynamics. The unconscious finds comfort in what it recognizes. It calls it safety, even when it hurts. Internalization also explains why someone's self-perception often feels out of sync with their reality. A person may achieve success yet still feel unworthy. They may be loved yet still feel replaceable. They may have freedom yet still feel trapped. Because the unconscious does not measure truth by the present. It measures truth by repetition. And whatever was repeated is what it believes. This is the psychology of internalization. The silent merging of old experiences with current identity. Over time, these internalized beliefs become the lens through which someone views themselves. A lens that distorts without being noticed. A lens that turns neutral moments into threats, kindness into suspicion, and uncertainty into catastrophe. And because this lens feels invisible, people assume their interpretations are reality rather than reflections of older wounds. The brain's ability to internalize is powerful, but it is also compassionate in its own way. Every belief it forms has a purpose. Stay quiet. Protected the child who lived with unpredictable anger. Don't need too much. Protected the child who learned love could disappear. Be perfect. Protected the child who feared rejection. These strategies were not mistakes. They were adaptations. What becomes painful is not that the beliefs formed, but that they continue operating long after they are needed. The brain does not update on its own. It clings to the safest interpretation it knows. And so, adults walk through life responding to wounds that no longer belong to the present. They are startled by gentle criticism, because once criticism meant danger. They shut down during conflict, because once raising their voice meant risking everything. They apologize for existing, because once existing felt like too much. Internalization also shapes identity in quieter ways. It influences tone, posture, confidence, tolerance for intimacy, expectations for love. It teaches people not only how to behave, but who they believe they are allowed to be. But here lies the most important truth. Internalized beliefs are learned, not inherent. They are impressions, not destiny. They may feel absolute, but they are not fixed. And learning this, seeing the architecture of one's inner world for what it is the beginning of reclamation. Because once a belief is recognized as something learned, it can eventually be unlearned. And once a pattern is seen clearly, it can no longer operate in the dark. This chapter is the quiet unveiling of that mechanism. The understanding that what lives inside you was formed by circumstances, not by essence. And essence, unlike circumstance, is still yours to rediscover. There is a moment in self-awareness when a person realizes that change is possible, yet every part of them seems to resist it. This resistance is not loud. It is quiet, subtle, woven into the smallest decisions. The hesitation before speaking, the urge to retreat when someone gets too close, the sudden tightening in the chest when a boundary needs to be set. It feels like an invisible force, pulling them backward just when they try to move forward. This is the quiet war within. The tension between who someone has been trained to be and who they feel themselves becoming. On the surface, it looks like indecision or self-sabotage. But beneath it lies something far more tender. The past has taught the unconscious mind that certain actions are dangerous, even when they are healthy. Vulnerability feels unsafe. Honesty feels risky. Trust feels unpredictable. And so the mind protects the person from stepping into unfamiliar emotional territory, even when the unfamiliar is exactly what they need. This inner conflict often shows up in contradictory desires. A person longs for closeness but fears being seen. They crave independence yet fear disappointing others. They want to speak their truth, but their throat tightens at the thought of conflict. It is not weakness, this contradiction. It is the nervous system attempting to shield them from pain it remembers too well. The body does not forget the moments that once felt overwhelming. It does not forget the shame of being misunderstood, the loneliness of not being heard, the sting of emotional abandonment. And so it prepares for danger long before danger appears. The quiet war within is not a battle between good and bad parts of the self. It is a negotiation between the part that wants to grow and the part that wants to remain protected. The protected part learned its role early. It learned to keep the peace, to avoid confrontation, to stay small, to be agreeable, to suppress needs. And because these strategies once kept someone emotionally safe, the mind clings to them with fierce devotion. Even now, years later, it insists on using them, not because it doubts the person's potential, but because it doubts the world's safety. This is why people often feel frustrated with themselves, unable to understand why change feels so hard. They think they lack discipline or strength, but in reality, they are trying to rewrite rules that were written into their nervous system long before they were conscious of them. Every attempt at change activates an internal alarm. Stay quiet. Don't risk it. Don't ask for too much. Don't show too much. The person pushing forward feels these alarms as anxiety, self-doubt, or emotional overwhelm. The inner protector feels them as duty. And for a while, the protector usually wins. Not because it is stronger, but because it is older. Yet the desire to change persists. It returns in moments of loneliness, in the ache of unmet needs, in the exhaustion of carrying emotional armor everywhere. It returns as a longing. Not for a different life necessarily, but for a different way of being within the life they already have. And slowly, awareness makes space for both sides of the internal conflict. The person begins to understand that resistance is not a sign of failure, but a sign of history. A sign that their mind is still trying to shield them from wounds that no longer need protection. The war within begins to soften when this is seen with compassion rather than judgment. For the first time, the person realizes that the part of them that resists is not the enemy. It is simply scared, and the part that longs for change is not nah. It is simply ready. In this delicate balance, something important happens. The beginning of cooperation between the old self and the emerging self. Not victory, not defeat, just understanding. And from understanding, a new kind of strength begins to grow. Quiet, steady, and profoundly human. You keep thinking you need more time, more clarity, more confidence. More signs from the universe. But what if the truth is simpler? What if the person you're waiting to become is already here, quietly breathing behind your hesitation? Jung believed that human beings are not incomplete, they are unfamiliar to themselves. You are not waiting to become someone. You are waiting to finally acknowledge someone you've never dared to meet. The stronger, clearer, braver version of you is not living in the future. It's living beneath the noise you keep fighting in the present. Every time you silence your intuition to keep the peace, you bury that self deeper. Every time you pretend you don't care so you don't get hurt, you dim that inner figure again. And every time you choose fear over possibility, you move further away from the one person who is meant to lead you, your deeper self. But here's the paradox, you cannot meet that version of you in comfort. Jung said that the greatest discovery is found not through the pursuit of light, but through the confrontation with your own darkness. Your strength lives inside the very parts of you you run from. Your clarity waits inside the questions you're afraid to ask. Your potential hides behind the habits you won't break. When you avoid your inner world, you are like a traveler who holds the map but refuses to look at it. You wander, thinking you are lost, but the path has always been marked in your own handwriting. Becoming yourself is not becoming. It is remembering. It is removing the layers of people, pleasing, fear, guilt, and self-doubt that were never yours to carry. When you peel them away, something surprising happens. You stop chasing confidence and start embodying it. You stop begging for validation and start radiating it. You stop fearing the unknown because you finally recognize that part of you has already walked ahead into the dark and is quietly guiding you forward. The self you haven't met yet is not a dream. It's your destiny. You meet them the moment you stop running from yourself and start listening. And when you do, life doesn't magically get easier. But you become someone who can handle what once broke you. You become someone you can trust. You become someone who no longer waits for the world to give permission to exist. You finally step into the life that was waiting for you to come home. You think fear means stop. You think discomfort means turn back. But Jung believed something radically different. The things you fear the most are often the exact things your soul is trying to lead you toward. Fear isn't always a warning. Sometimes it's a compass. Not every fear is danger. Some fears are disguised invitations. You feel afraid to speak up because you're meant to find your voice. You fear losing people because you're meant to find independence. You fear failure because you're meant to unlock a strength you don't yet trust. You fear being seen because you're meant to step into your truth. Every fear carries a message. One you've been avoiding because you assume fear is an enemy. But Jung reminds us that the psyche speaks through symbols, tension, discomfort, and dreams. Fear is one of its loudest languages. The things that scare you aren't random. They are mirrors. They show you where you are unhealed, where you are holding back, and where you have outgrown who you used to be. Think about it. The reason certain situations terrify you is because they threaten the version of yourself you are meant to outgrow. That fear you feel before making a big decision. It's not telling you, don't do it. It's telling you, this decision will change you. And change always feels like danger to the parts of you that want to stay safe, small, predictable. But your life was never meant to be lived inside the boundaries of old fears. Every time you step toward what scares you, you evolve. Every time you lean into discomfort, your identity expands. And every time you choose courage over avoidance, you collect pieces of yourself you didn't even know were missing. Fear is not the wall, fear is the doorway. The moment you move through it, you discover that most fears were made of paper, not brick. You discover that you were capable long before you believed it. You discover that everything you want lives on the other side of a feeling you've been running from for years. So the next time something pulls you and scares you at the same time, pay attention. That tension is not a contradiction. It's a sign that you're standing at the threshold of who you're supposed to become. Walk toward it, slowly if you must, shaking if you must. But walk anyway, because fear will shrink when you face it. But you will grow every time you do.